Thank you, Hugh. So now for continuing with the discussions around tuna, I would like to invite Angela Cruz to come up, who's going to talk us through the role of satellite buoys in dFADs in the Indian Ocean. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks for having me here today. My name is Angela Cruz. I work for a small firm out of Seattle called Ross Strategic. I'll start off by saying I wouldn't consider myself an expert in dFADs. There are obviously the companies here, and I won't talk too much on how they work or any of that, or the echo sounder buoys. I also wouldn't consider myself fully an expert in tuna, but what we do a lot at my firm is collaborative processes and high conflict scenarios for natural resources management. I will also say that this project has been a moving target for me, and so it continues to be so, and it's a little bit incomplete. Obviously, this is an ongoing situation in the Western Indian Ocean with new developments every day. Ultimately, the project purpose was to really think about how dFAD buoy developers are approaching issues associated with dFADs. What are the developers planning for, and how are they responding to increased pressure on the purseine fleet and FAD-associated fleets? And then lastly, which is largely the focus of this presentation, is what are the areas of tension that can be addressed to lead to stronger collaboration on data and communication between the IOTC, dFAD buoy developers, and the fishing industry. Part of this is I talked to 3 representatives from the 3 companies. All 3 are also here today. So SatLink, Uniball, and Marine Instruments. And then I started framing this around the World Economic Forum's collaboration for the common good for data, and thinking about what those enabling factors are to solid data collaboration. I would say that the World Economic Forum paper is primarily focused on human data in social dimensions, so really human-centered. But if you look to the right, this is the framework for enabling conditions. There's a lot of overlap here that I think we can provide some lessons learned. So some quick framing around the issue, which I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with given the publicity associated with it. The primary Indian Ocean tuna species of concern in the Western Indian Ocean and associated with dFADs are yellowfin tuna, which have been overexploited since 2015, and overexploitation has continued. And big eye tuna has been overexploited since 2012. The capture of juveniles has been a primary concern in the Indian Ocean, and those have primarily been associated with drifting fish aggregating devices. And obviously the IOTC is a managing body, and it's the only tuna RFMO associated or under the umbrella of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, which becomes a bit more relevant later. All right, so just a bit of background. Again, I'm not an expert, and if there are specific questions about how echo sounder buoys work associated with dFADs, I probably wouldn't be the person to ask. I would strongly advise against it. But in general, the dFADs are the actual floating structure themselves, and the buoys are the objects that are collecting information, including biomass and location data, that's getting provided to fishers to make decisions on when and where to fish. There are, like with any other technology, there are benefits and concerns associated with it as it comes to be more available and more widely used. Some of the benefits that we know about obviously were presented on earlier, but it's highly efficient in catch, which contributes to consistency and income for fishers. It's reducing time at sea, and just in general leading to higher catch, which also is a problem. The concerns around dFADs include the high catch of juveniles, difficulty assessing fishing effort due to not a lot of information on who's using FADs and when and where, although we do have a bit more information now. There's higher bycatch compared to free swimming schools, but lower bycatch compared to other methods depending on the analysis that you're using. And then loss of dFADs has been a wide piece of attention, including for marine litter drifting into marine protected areas, and then also potential for ghost fishing, although disentangling FADs has made it less of a problem. FAD use in the Indian Ocean has been rising, and the echo sounder buoys have been enabling fishers to make better decisions on catch, be more efficient. Between 2017 and 2021, FAD sets accounted for about 35% of tuna catch in the Indian Ocean. This is according to ISSF. There are some differences in reporting numbers. In 2020, the IOTC estimated between 12,500 and 14,800 buoys monitored by the purseine fleet. Again, this is a bit difficult to assess, but these were the most recent numbers that I had. And then all of this has obviously come to the forefront of conversation associated with the EU objection to the Resolution 2302, which sought to manage dFADs more heavily. Currently, there is some requirements reporting-wise for members of the IOTC, including reporting of interactions and catches, but it's a bit inconsistent. There are also a number of other management efforts, and what I have on the left is just a snapshot of what was told to me by the buoy developers who are obviously receiving this data and transmitting it to fishers, and then also things that fishers are doing individually. There's a large amount of work being done by the buoy developers in terms of FAD loss. All three were participating in FAD Watch in the Indian Ocean, and then also looking to reduce marine litter. There are some fishing companies in the region who have been directly sharing their biomass data and location data with individual country governments and national scientists. So that's already happening, but that's voluntarily by the fishers themselves and not necessarily the total picture of all the data. Also, all three buoy developers are working with ASCI on various scientific efforts. So these are related to biodegradability of FADs, relating biodata to total biomass, which is something that is of interest largely by the NGO community. And then discrimination of species, so not only biomass and location, but also species composition underneath the FAD. And then lastly, there's a lot of efforts beyond that, electronic monitoring being a large focus, which you can hear all about here. As far as the IOTC goes, some of their management efforts are related to the FAD limits, which when I talked to a couple of the buoy developers, they were saying that FAD limits are an okay way to limit fishing effort, but maybe not the best. There was an attempt to lower the number from 300 to 250 even further, but that did not happen due to the objection. Oh my gosh, I'm almost out of time. Okay. FAD data reporting is a bit weak in the IOTC, though it is technically supposed to be done. Disentangling FADs are required. There's adopted categories for biodegradability of FADs, and then safe handling and prohibition of setting on whales, sharks, and cetaceans. I gotta go. Okay, so why do people want this data so bad? And that is the crux of it. To the right, this is again from the World Economic Forum, the value dimensions of data collaboration, which I'm seeing a lot of parallels across why we would want the data. It's been called upon by NGOs and stakeholders across the world to provide the full data from the buoy developers that they're collecting on the FAD sets. And it's a mix of compliance and scientific uses, obviously. So it's to follow the history of a given FAD, improve tuna stock assessments, utilize the data for science-based limits, and then also provide the scientific basis for these decisions that have been put on hold so significantly in the IOTC and so critically. So then I was really interested in the sticking points, right? Like why is it so hard? And I'm not here to say whether or not data should be fully shared openly, just voluntarily by companies, because that's not my place. But I am interested in understanding what those sticking points are. And these were some of what I heard, and again, it relates to the risk dimensions for data shares in the WEF framework. Most often people say it's industry secrets, and that's the most commonly cited thing, and that is definitely a part of it, right? Like fishers don't want to give up their fishing ground, don't want to reveal information that's important to them in terms of where they're finding tuna. But it's also related to the interpretation of the data. Like it's a lot of data that is coming through these buoys, and if it's shared publicly and openly, completely, that might not be very interpretable to the public. It might get misinterpreted very easily, and it's just too much information for the average person to use without background information from the companies themselves. Additionally, the bandwidth is going to get modified, so if they start sharing some data across one technology, they're going to have to start sharing, or there's going to be an expectation to share more, and their priorities are going to shift away from their customer, the fishers, and what they need out of the data to what's being required by management bodies, so that was a concern. The other concern is being put under the microscope. Currently, the focus is on dFAD use, and if data is shared, there comes to be a solution. What comes next? You know, there's other technologies that are being used, that are being applied, and more data. So it's just this ever-going thing that they're needing to sort through. And then again, balancing those customer wants and management needs has been a concern, and again, the confidentiality of fishing grounds. Okay, While all this is happening, there's the concerns, but then there's also challenges within the IOTC itself for their own data management and decision-making processes, which is it's no mystery really, but data for dFADs that has been used to date has primarily been for compliance purposes, so the concern that it's going to be used for compliance versus scientific use is not unreasonable. That has been the case. There are challenges associated with internal reporting by members, different numbers coming at different times of the year for the same period, that the internal management system of its own data isn't necessarily going that well, or isn't the best at the moment. There's also IOTC interpolitical interests at play. So competing interests in the roles of members are associated with sovereignty, foreign aid, and other development aspects outside the realm of RFMO decision-making. So decisions aren't necessarily being made in the interest of science and in sustainability all the time. There's other interests being driven. There's also a diversity of stakeholders involved in the RFMO scientific panels, which, 1 minute? Okay, cool. Which is going to deviate discussion from science-based discussion to more advocacy and political interests again, and away from that notion of science. I'm going to skip this next one. It's just inside processes. And then the last has to do with a naming and shaming technique that's within the FAO that kind of has extended to the IOTC in its own way. So what does this all mean? I'm almost done, I swear, and I'm going to skip this slide. But basically, I have a series of questions that I'm trying to figure out associated with this framework and these different enabling conditions for data sharing, and I would love to explore them more with you. And I can basically end there. That's fine.